Get ready for a wild tale from 1930s Australia. Farmers in Western Australia found themselves in a strange battle, not against other people, but against giant birds called emus. These creatures, taller than a grown man, were used to roaming freely. They trampled and ate crops, causing serious trouble for the farmers. These farmers were ex-soldiers, tough guys who'd seen their share of action. But fighting birds wasn't in the handbook. Desperate, they begged the government for help. And what did the government do? Well, they sent in the actual army, soldiers with machine guns, ready to deal with the feathered invaders. You'd think this was a sure win for the humans, right? But those emus weren't about to give up. They were fast, scattering all over the place, making it almost impossible to get a good shot. The soldiers chased them across the outback, firing round after round, but hardly making a dent in the emu population. Word got out, and the whole thing turned into a national joke. This bizarre emu war the army was losing badly. Turns out, taking down a flock of birds is way harder than it seems. The army eventually retreated, leaving the farmers to find their own solutions. So, in the end, a bunch of flightless birds basically won a war against the Australian military. Who would have thought? Speaking of strange battles, get ready for another bizarre tale from history, this one even wilder than an army fighting birds. It's 1518, a town called Strasbourg, and a woman named Frau Trophäa starts dancing in the street. Just out of nowhere, can't stop, won't stop, dancing for hours on end. That might be funny for a while, but here's the creepy part, it wasn't just her. Like a weird disease, this dancing fever spread. Soon dozens, then hundreds were caught by it, dancing until they literally dropped. Some even died from exhaustion or heart attacks, all because they couldn't stop dancing. The whole town was freaked out. The leaders thought it was some kind of curse, and their solution? More dancing. They built stages, hired musicians, hoping that if the sick people danced even more, it'd somehow get it out of their system. To this day, no one's entirely sure what caused it. Disease? Some kind of poison? Or was it something even stranger, a mass panic, an example of how fear and stress can make people do truly bizarre things? Whatever the answer, the dancing plague is a chilling reminder of the strange things the human mind and body can do under extreme circumstances. Who knows what oddities the past still holds, waiting to be rediscovered? From dancing plagues to armies outwitted by birds, history is full of the unexpected. But sometimes, the biggest mysteries lie in the things we think we know. The Great Wall of China is a perfect example. Everyone associates it with battles and defense, but the story goes way deeper. This massive wall wasn't just about keeping armies out, it was also a giant border control station. The Silk Road, that famous trade route, ran right along its length. The Chinese emperors weren't about to let all that trade slip through their fingers. With gates and towers all along the wall, they could control who came and went, what goods were traded, and of course, collect taxes on all of it. See, the Great Wall wasn't just about defense, it was about power. How many other famous places are hiding surprising second purposes just waiting for us to figure them out? Turns out that even the most iconic foods can have a hidden history. Take something as simple as ketchup. Bet you think it's always been about tomatoes and hot dogs, right? Well, buckle up, because ketchup's story takes some crazy turns. It all started in ancient China, but not with tomatoes. They called their sauce ketchup, and it was made with pickled fish. Think more like a salty, savory sauce for stir-fries, nothing like the ketchup we know. Then British sailors got a taste of it in Asia and loved the idea. They brought it home, but fish sauce wasn't really their thing. So they started experimenting. Ketchup made of mushrooms, walnuts, even oysters. Still no tomatoes, but you can see how they were getting closer to that condiment flavor. The tomato twist came way later, over here in America. Tomatoes were becoming popular, and some clever cook figured out they worked perfectly in that British-inspired sauce. Sweeter, tangier, more like the ketchup we love today. And the rest, as they say, is history. Speaking of kitchen inventions, here's a story about a melted candy bar that changed the world. It all starts with a guy named Percy Spencer, a brilliant engineer working during World War II. His job was building radar equipment for the military, the kind that uses invisible waves to detect enemy planes. One day, Percy's near one of these machines when something weird happens. A chocolate bar in his pocket melts, all gooey and gross. Most people would be annoyed, but not Percy. He gets that, curious look in his eye. A melted candy bar from an invisible wave. Could it be cooking? That sounds crazy, but Percy runs with it. Popcorn kernels by the radar machine. Pop, pop, pop. An egg? It cooks in seconds, exploding all over the place. Percy had stumbled onto something huge. Microwaves, those radar waves, could cook food, and super fast. Raytheon, the company he worked for, saw dollar signs. A kitchen machine that cooks without fire? Revolutionary. Their first attempt, the Radar Range, was a monster, but the idea took off. Today, almost every kitchen has a microwave, and it all started with a melted candy bar and a curious scientist who dared to ask, what if? Sometimes, even the things we think we know can hold hidden meanings. Take the Statue of Liberty. Everyone sees her as a symbol of America welcoming immigrants, right? Yet that wasn't the original plan at all. She was actually a gift from France to celebrate America's 100th birthday. It was all about freedom and democracy, that torch representing enlightenment, the date on her tablet, the 4th of July, a symbol of the American Revolution, not immigration. So how did she become a beacon for immigrants? Blame it on a poem. Years later, a poet named Emma Lazarus wrote that famous bit about "you're tired, you're poor," to raise money for the statue's base, and the idea stuck. Ellis Island, the main port of entry for immigrants, was nearby, and those lines captured the hopes of millions who passed the statue on their way to a new life. Just goes to show how symbols can shift and change over time. Speaking of famous symbols taking on new meanings, let's talk about Christopher Columbus. You know the story. Sailed the ocean blue in 1492, discovered America, the whole bit. Except he messed up big time. Columbus was trying to find a shortcut to Asia to trade for spices and riches. But his maps were way off. He thought the world was much smaller, so when he bumped into an island after a few weeks, he figured it must be somewhere near Japan. The only problem was, it wasn't. He'd stumbled onto a whole new continent, or rather, 2 continents nobody in Europe knew existed. He went to his grave thinking he'd made it to Asia. It took other explorers to figure out the truth. So Columbus Day is really more like, oops, wrong continent day. One wrong turn can take you to unexpected places, but what happens when history itself takes a wrong turn? The Library of Alexandria was a wonder of the ancient world, filled with knowledge from the greatest minds of its time, and then it was gone. This library wasn't just some dusty shelves. It was an entire city of scholars, mathematicians, poets, astronomers, and every other kind of thinker you can imagine. They gathered writings from all over the known world, a treasure trove of maps, theories, and stories no one had ever imagined. Then came the fires, wars, misunderstandings, clashes of cultures. Over centuries, the library was destroyed again and again. It's easy to blame ancient battles, but the real villain might be simpler. If people stop caring about knowledge, it can vanish into thin air as if it was never there at all. Think of everything lost in those flames: cures for diseases, maps to undiscovered lands, poems that would have made us cry, all that human potential turned to ash. It's heartbreaking and a little terrifying, honestly. The Library of Alexandria is a reminder that even the greatest things we build can crumble if we forget why they matter. And sometimes, the things we lose aren't physical. Think about the knowledge destroyed at Alexandria. But what if the very way we measure time itself could be wrong? That's what happened centuries ago with something called the Julian calendar. See, the Earth doesn't take a perfect 365 days to orbit the Sun. It's more like 365 and a quarter days. The old calendar didn't account for those fractions, so over time, the dates got all messed up. Farmers were confused about when to plant, religious festivals happened at the wrong times. It was a mess. Finally, Pope Gregory XIII steps in and says, "Enough! New calendar, better rules to keep things accurate." But remember, this is the 1500s. Not everyone was happy about the Pope messing with time, even if it was for the good of science. People rioted, countries refused to switch. It took centuries for everyone to agree on what day it was. The funny thing is, today we barely think about the Gregorian calendar. It's just how the world works. Speaking of strong leaders facing controversy, remember Cleopatra? One of the most famous Egyptians ever. Except, here's a twist, Cleopatra wasn't Egyptian. Her family, the Ptolemies, were Macedonians, descended from one of Alexander the Great's generals who seized Egypt after Alexander's death. For generations, they ruled as Greek-speaking pharaohs, barely mixing with the Egyptian people. Cleopatra changed all that. Unlike her ancestors, she learned Egyptian, embraced their gods, and presented herself as a living goddess, part of an ancient tradition, not a foreign queen. It was a brilliant political move and part of what made Cleopatra such a fascinating figure, a Macedonian Greek who became the last and arguably most beloved pharaoh of Egypt. As always, thanks for watching. Be sure to like, comment, and subscribe. And tune in with us next time for more fascinating bits of history that you probably didn't know.